My name is Alyssa, and the day my life truly began was the day my parents threw me out like trash, on my own birthday. I had just finished a long shift at the grocery store, dreaming of maybe a cheap takeout dinner and a small, quiet celebration. Instead, I pulled into the driveway and saw my life packed up on the front porch, my clothes, my laptop, my boxes, all stacked as if someone was clearing out old junk. Catherine, my mom, looked me straight in the eye and said I was done living there. Robert, my dad, stood beside her and didn't even argue. I remember my hands shaking as I realized they were serious. There was no surprise party waiting, no cake, no candles, just my things on the porch and a cold message. I was out, and they were moving on without me. In that moment, every word I wanted to scream got stuck in my throat. My parents kicked me out on my birthday, and I said nothing. I just picked up my boxes, loaded them into my beat-up car, and drove away. No big fight, no dramatic goodbye, just silence and the sound of everything I knew collapsing in my rearview mirror. I thought that was the worst thing they could ever do to me. Years later, after clawing my way back and finally buying my own home, they showed up at my front door, walked through my living room like they owned it, and calmly told me, "This is a family asset. If you want to know how the girl we kicked out on her birthday ended up owning the house we tried to take, stay with me until the end." That moment happened on my 26th birthday, the one day you're supposed to feel like people are glad you exist. I clocked out from my shift at the grocery store, feet aching, smelling like spilled coffee, but still a little hopeful. On my break, I had bought myself a cheap cupcake from the bakery section, thinking that if no one else celebrated me, at least I would. Driving home, I imagined something small waiting for me. Maybe pizza boxes on the counter. Maybe a store-bought cake with my name spelled slightly wrong. When I turned onto our street, I saw it, my life piled on the lawn. My suitcases, boxes of clothes, a plastic bin with my old textbooks, and my second-hand monitor wrapped in a blanket. For a second, I thought maybe there had been a leak or some emergency. I parked crooked, left the cupcake on the seat, and walked toward the house. Catherine stood on the porch with her arms crossed. Robert hovered behind her, eyes on the ground. My little sister, Lila, sat on the steps, scrolling on her phone. My mom did not say happy birthday. She said, "You are 26, Alyssa. This has gone on long enough. We need the room. You have to move out." I stared at her. "Today? On my birthday?" She rolled her eyes. "Do not make this dramatic. We raised you. We did our part. You have a job. You'll figure it out." Robert finally looked up long enough to add, "This is for your own good. You will grow if you are pushed." Lila smirked and said, "Everyone I know moved out ages ago. You should be thanking Mom." I wanted to yell that I paid most of the utility bills, that the Wi-Fi she used for classes stayed on because of me, but I could already see how it would go. My mom crying and calling me ungrateful, my dad retreating, Lila filming. In the end, I would still be outside, bruised in my throat from shouting. So, I said nothing. Quietly, I asked, "Where am I supposed to go?" Catherine shrugged. "You're an adult. Stay with a friend. Find something cheap. Just don't expect to come back. We need your room for something useful." Useful? As if I had never been. I picked up a box, carried it to my beat-up car, and kept going until everything was loaded. No begging, no bargaining, just the scrape of cardboard on concrete. I glanced at the front door one last time, and realized it was not my home anymore. If it ever had been, it wasn't now. I drove until the houses thinned out and highway signs took over, then pulled into a cheap roadside motel with half the sign burned out. The room smelled like old smoke and bleach, but the key was in my hand, and no one could tell me to get out. I sat on the edge of the stiff bed, ate my cold cupcake alone, and checked my bank account. The number was small and scary. For a second, I almost called my mom to beg for a few days of grace. Then I remembered how sure she looked with my things on the lawn. They had not hesitated, so I did not either. Lying on that scratchy comforter, staring at the stained ceiling, I made myself a promise. I would never beg to go back to a place that treated me like trash on the one day I deserved better. The morning after that motel birthday, I woke up with a stiff neck, a pounding headache, and no safety net. I checked my phone, half expecting a missed call from my parents, some kind of apology, or at least a, "What hotel are you at?" Maybe we overreacted. There was nothing, just a calendar notification that said, "Happy birthday, Alyssa." Like a cruel joke from an app that didn't know better. I did the only thing that made sense. I got up, showered in lukewarm water, put on my uniform, and drove to work like my whole life hadn't just been flipped over. I worked my grocery store shift pretending everything was normal, smiling at customers, scanning items, making small talk about sales and recipes, while my brain kept screaming, "You have nowhere to sleep tonight." On my breaks, I searched for rooms for rent on my phone, filtering by cheapest first and hoping for something that didn't look like a horror movie set. Seattle was only an hour away, and the rents made my stomach twist. But staying in that motel long-term was not an option. By the end of the day, I had arranged to see a tiny studio in the city, the kind of place with peeling paint and a view of a brick wall. Cramped and overpriced, but the landlord didn't ask too many questions as long as I could pay the deposit. I signed the papers with the shaky confidence of someone who had no idea how she would afford the next month. The first few weeks were brutal. I kept my grocery store job, but the drive was long and the pay barely covered rent. So I picked up a second job, doing late-night shifts at a burger place a few blocks from my studio. My days became a relentless loop: wake up before sunrise, drive to work, scan groceries and bag for 8 hours, grab a quick snack in the car, clock in at the burger place, smell like fries and grease until midnight, stumble home, shower, pass out, repeat. There was no time to dwell on my parents, and that was kind of the point. I was too exhausted to think about betrayal. I focused on survival. One night, a woman came through my line at the grocery store who I recognized instantly, Sophia Chen. She had been a regular for months, always carrying a laptop bag and a Bluetooth headset, always talking about investors and deadlines. I didn't know exactly what she did, but it sounded important. That night, she was distracted, scrolling through her emails while I rang up her groceries. Without thinking, I helped her repack everything when her reusable bag ripped. I taped it together, double-bagged the heavy items, and made a dumb joke about duct tape holding adult life together. She actually laughed and looked at my name tag. "You're the girl who always fixes the self-checkouts, right?" she asked. I shrugged, embarrassed. I just punched buttons and reset machines when they froze. But she made it sound like I was performing surgery. She asked how long I had worked there, and before I could stop myself, the story came tumbling out, stripped down, raw. My parents kicked me out. I was figuring things out. 2 jobs, tiny apartment, no plan beyond survival. Instead of the usual pity face people give, she just stared for a moment and said, "You know, my startup is always looking for people who can problem solve and actually show up. Ever thought about tech?" I laughed. Me? Tech? I hadn't even finished college. But she didn't laugh at me. She explained coding boot camps, career switches without a degree, free resources online. Then she did something unexpected. She wrote her email on the back of my receipt and said, "If you're serious about changing your life, send me a message. I can't promise anything, but I can point you in the right direction." That night, after my burger shift, I sat at the tiny table in my studio with my laptop open, searching everything she mentioned. Free courses, beginner tutorials, coding boot camps in Seattle. The words might as well have been in another language, but there was one thought I couldn't shake. I had already lost everything once. What was the worst that could happen if I tried and failed again? Over the next few months, I carved out pockets of time that didn't exist. I watched tutorials during lunch breaks, printed cheat sheets and taped them above my thrift store desk, joined free online communities where people asked questions I barely understood. Slowly, very slowly, things started clicking. Late one night, after finishing a practice project, I finally emailed Sophia. I told her I was serious. I sent screenshots of my messy little websites, the ones I built by copying tutorials line by line and tweaking them. She wrote back, not with a job offer, but with something better. A link to a part-time coding boot camp she recommended and a note, "If you get in and commit, I'll talk to my team about an internship." I applied, assuming it was a long shot. Somehow, I got in. The first few weeks of the boot camp were brutal. My mornings began before sunrise, juggling my grocery store job, and evenings stretched late into the night, coding until my eyes burned. I would come home from the burger place, dump my backpack on the floor of my tiny studio, and stare at my laptop, trying to make sense of JavaScript functions that seemed like an entirely foreign language. I quickly learned that the online tutorials and PDFs weren't enough. Real coding required thinking differently, breaking problems apart, testing solutions, failing, and trying again. I spent hours repeating the same exercises, copying examples line by line, and debugging errors that made no sense. Each success felt tiny, almost laughably small, like getting a drop-down menu to actually drop down, or a button to change color when clicked. But to me, each tiny win was monumental. Money was tight. My budget was absurdly strict: ramen noodles, black coffee, and whatever scraps I could grab during my shifts. Nights when I couldn't afford takeout, I'd open the fridge to a nearly empty container of salad greens and imagine they were a fancy meal. Friends stopped asking me out because my answer was always, "I have to work or study." And honestly, I couldn't blame them. My life had no room for socializing yet. It was a tunnel of coding exercises, grocery scans, and burger orders. Still, I kept going. Every time I thought about quitting, I pictured my parents' front lawn, my boxes stacked like trash, and their smug faces as they walked away. They thought they had ended me. But here I was, alive, tired, frustrated, but moving forward. Their doubts became my fuel. One night, after finishing a long coding module, I sent Sophia an email. I attached screenshots of my small projects, my messy websites, and explained I was committed, even though I was barely keeping up. To my surprise, she wrote back quickly, "Good. I can see you're serious. Keep building. When you're ready, I'll connect you with an internship project. Real clients, real deadlines. Nothing fancy, but real-world experience will teach more than any tutorial." That single line gave me a strange thrill. Real-world experience meant stakes. Real work meant I could prove something, not just to Sophia, but to myself. I realized slowly that coding wasn't just learning commands and syntax, it was learning patience, resilience, and how to think logically under pressure. The boot camp was a treadmill. Morning job, evening coding, late night burger shift, repeat. I would fall asleep with my laptop open, code still on the screen, a cup of cold coffee beside me. My body screamed for rest, my mind screamed at me for mistakes. But over time, patterns emerged. I learned how to break problems down into smaller chunks, debug systematically, and anticipate errors. The tiny victories stacked into confidence. Then came the first project I built entirely on my own, a simple web app to track personal expenses. Nothing fancy, but it worked. I could log expenses, see totals, and even categorize them. The first time it actually ran without errors, I laughed out loud in my tiny studio. I had created something functional from scratch. For the first time, I felt capable, like I could actually build a life outside my parents' control. Sophia noticed my progress and introduced me to the startup team she worked with. They gave me small coding tasks, debugging, styling interfaces, minor features. Nothing glamorous, but everything mattered. I made mistakes constantly, but they treated me like a professional, offered guidance, expected accountability, and never dismissed my lack of experience. Late nights turned into early mornings of coding practice, and gradually, my confidence grew alongside my skills. I was no longer just surviving, I was starting to thrive. The girl who had hauled boxes to a motel on her birthday was now building real applications, learning marketable skills, and creating opportunities she hadn't dared to imagine before. Every time I struggled, I remembered the feeling of being powerless on my parents' lawn. I channeled it into determination. One day, I would not just survive, I would own my future completely. And slowly, that day felt closer than ever. By the time I landed the internship through Sophia's startup, my life had started to feel a little less like constant chaos, and a little more like progress. My days were still long, but now the work I was doing had weight. Each line of code mattered to someone beyond myself, and that was both terrifying and exhilarating. My morning routine remained brutal. Up before sunrise, coffee in hand, heading to the grocery store. By late afternoon, I rushed to the internship, laptop bag slung over my shoulder, diving into tasks I had only dreamed of tackling. Some nights I would barely make it home before midnight, only to find my studio dark and empty. No one waited with a warm meal, no one asked how my day had gone. But that absence of expectation became a strange gift. I could focus entirely on myself, my goals, and my skills without interruption. The internship itself was a crash course in professionalism. I learned about version control, collaborative coding, debugging with multiple team members, and communicating technical issues in ways that made sense. Mistakes were inevitable. I broke parts of the app more than once, but each error was a lesson. Each correction, a confidence boost. I realized quickly that failing in tech didn't make you weak, it made you stronger if you actually learned something. The first paycheck I earned from coding was surreal. I remember staring at the numbers in my bank account, disbelief washing over me. The girl who had spent nights counting coins in a motel room now had a legitimate income. Not enough to live lavishly, certainly, but enough to feel a shift. I no longer had to budget every snack, or worry constantly about whether I could pay rent. For the first time in years, I felt a little freedom, the kind that comes from knowing your survival no longer depends on the kindness or whims of someone else. Even though I still worked the grocery store and the burger place, the internship energized me in a way that labor never had. Coding felt like a lifeline, a path out of my past. My confidence started to grow incrementally. I spoke up more in meetings, suggested minor improvements, and contributed in ways that mattered. Sophia and the team noticed. The encouragement was small but consistent. That's a good solution, or, nice thinking, keep iterating. Simple words, but they built a bridge from who I had been to who I could become. Outside work, I made small choices to rebuild my life. I bought a proper desk for my studio, organized my workspace, and started cooking simple meals instead of living on fast food. I created routines that reinforce stability. Laundry on Sundays, groceries on Fridays, coding practice every night. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Every small habit felt like a reclaiming of control over my own life. Social life remained minimal. Friends still didn't reach out much, and I was fine with it. I had learned that most people couldn't understand my grind, couldn't see the stakes I was playing for. The only support system I had was myself, and slowly, Sophia became a mentor figure. I learned to rely on someone for guidance without feeling guilty, which was a new sensation. The financial side of things became increasingly clear. My grocery and burger jobs now felt like supplemental income rather than survival mechanisms. I could start setting aside savings, even if just small amounts. I began reading about investing, credit scores, and planning for long-term financial independence. The concept of owning your life started to feel tangible, not just a dream. Late at night, when I was alone in my studio, I sometimes thought about my parents. Their lawn. The boxes. Their smug insistence that I was not ready. But those thoughts no longer filled me with panic or shame, they fueled me. Every line of code I wrote, every project I completed, every paycheck I earned was a quiet, stubborn act of defiance. I was building a life entirely on my own terms, and it felt exhilarating. By the end of that internship cycle, I had grown exponentially, not just as a developer, but as a person. The girl who had been thrown out on her birthday was now standing firmly on her own 2 feet. It wasn't perfect. There were nights I cried from exhaustion, days I doubted myself, and moments when I missed a family I knew had hurt me. But I was learning that independence didn't come from perfection, it came from showing up, learning, and claiming your space in the world, no matter how small it felt at first. The internship ended, and a new chapter awaited, my first paid tech position. It wasn't just a job, it was validation. A signal that the life I had clawed back, night by night, shift by shift, was real. After the internship ended, I was offered a junior developer position at Sophia's startup. For the first time, I had a steady, reliable income that actually reflected my effort. The relief was enormous, but it came with a new challenge, balancing ambition with exhaustion. My grocery store and burger jobs were still there, but I began cutting back hours, prioritizing coding, learning, and building a career. For the first time, my life was aligned with my goals instead of just survival. The first few months in the office were intimidating. I was surrounded by people with degrees, experience, and confidence I didn't yet have. I questioned every line of code I wrote, every idea I pitched. But slowly, confidence replaced doubt. I learned to own my work, ask questions without fear, and even mentor newer interns. With each project completed, the whisper of my parents' voices, their ridicule and dismissal, faded. I realized that their judgment didn't define me anymore. The promotion came unexpectedly fast. My team lead called me into a small conference room, praised my problem-solving skills, and handed me the title of mid-level developer. I stared at the email confirmation on my phone, heart pounding. That single line of text was more than recognition, it was validation that my hard work had paid off. The girl who once ate cold takeout in a motel room on her birthday now had a real career, a path forward, and most importantly, control over her own life. Financial independence opened new doors. I started budgeting not just for rent and bills but for savings, investments, and long-term goals. Owning a home, something I had only dreamed of while staring at my packed boxes on my parents' porch, became tangible. I researched neighborhoods, calculated down payments, and spoke to mortgage advisors. Each small step felt like staking a claim in a world I had fought to enter on my own terms. The apartment I rented was small, but it felt like mine. I decorated it in ways that reflected my personality: bright curtains, plants on the windowsill, a desk for coding and planning. I hosted friends occasionally, cooked real meals, and even set up a small bookshelf in the corner. Every decision, no matter how minor, reinforced that this life belonged to me. One evening, after a long day at work, I sat at my desk calculating my finances for the first time in a methodical way. I realized that, if I kept saving aggressively and leveraged my career growth, I could afford a modest townhouse in Seattle within a year. The idea electrified me. For the first time, I was planning a future instead of reacting to the present. Every overtime shift, every late-night project, every ounce of stress felt like laying bricks for a home I would own. I found a small 3-story townhouse in Ballard. It wasn't flashy, no magazine-perfect photos, no sprawling backyard, but it had clean lines, a little balcony, a functional kitchen, and sunlight spilling into the living room just right. I felt at the moment I walked through the door, this was my space, my fortress, my accomplishment. I made an offer, negotiated terms I barely understood at first, and when the confirmation came, I couldn't stop staring at the email. My name was on the deed. Every line on the documents whispered, "You did it." Closing day was surreal. I signed stacks of paperwork, each pen stroke marking a boundary between my past and the future I had carved for myself. The motel room, the boxes on the porch, the endless shifts, they all felt like necessary steps to this moment. I held the keys in my hand, walked through the empty rooms, and felt a weight lift from my chest. I was no longer a child at the mercy of my parents' whims. I was a woman who had fought, clawed, and coded her way to independence. That first night in my townhouse, I sat on the bare floor with just a blanket and a pillow, listening to the hum of the city outside. I smiled, thinking about how far I had come. The home was more than walls and a roof, it was proof. Proof that even when people tried to push you down, even when life seemed to strip everything away, you could rise. I realized then that control, freedom, and safety were not gifts my parents had ever given me, they were things I had to take. And I had done exactly that. This house wasn't a family asset, as they would have said, it was my life, fully owned and uncompromised. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when the doorbell rang. I was unpacking groceries, humming to myself, when I paused. A package. A neighbor. I wiped my hands, walked to the front door, and checked the camera. My stomach sank. There they were, my parents and my sister, standing right on my porch. Mom, her hair grayer and makeup heavier, took the lead. Dad trailed behind, hunched, looking uncomfortable. And my sister, Lila, scrolling on her phone, smirked as if she already knew the chaos she would cause. For a moment, I considered pretending I wasn't home. Then I realized I didn't have to hide anymore. I opened the door. "Nice place," Mom said, stepping in without asking, her eyes scanning my living room like she owned it. "Much better than that tiny apartment you had before." "Why are you here?" I asked, keeping my voice calm, though my chest tightened. Dad tried a softer approach. "We need to talk. It's important." I stepped aside. They walked through my house like tourists, inspecting rooms, touching the furniture, assessing everything. Mom ran her hand along the couch. "This is nice. So much nicer than your old place." Lila's gaze darted around, impressed despite herself. "Wow, Alyssa, you actually got a whole house." I stayed near the kitchen island. I asked why you're here. Mom straightened, a calculated look crossing her face. The bank doesn't care about sentiment. We heard you bought a house. This changes everything. My pulse quickened. Excuse me. This isn't just your home, she said, her voice flat and commanding. This is a family asset. We raised you, fed you, gave you guidance. You owe us a part of this. I froze for a second, hearing the same words I had avoided for years. Family, asset, oh. Dad nodded. We aren't asking for much. One room for us, one for Lila. You still have your office, right? I blinked. You kicked me out because there wasn't room. You needed my bedroom for Lila's classes. And now suddenly, my house solves all your problems. Mom waved her hand, dismissive. We did this for you. If we hadn't pushed you, you would never have left. You should be grateful. This is our investment paying off. A family asset. Lila chimed in, leaning against the counter. Mom's right. Everyone I know moved out years ago. You have extra rooms. Why are you being so selfish? I felt my throat tighten, but I stood taller. I'm not selfish for living in a house I earned. You didn't co-sign. You aren't on the deed. This is mine. Mom's expression hardened. You wouldn't have this job without us. We sacrificed. We struggled. We pushed you. You owe us one signature, and your parents aren't on the street. Or would you rather see us homeless while you sit here alone? The guilt tactic used to work on me. Not anymore. I took a deep breath. You made your choices. I made mine. I am not putting my home or my future at risk. You are not moving in. Dad tried one last time. Alyssa, please, we are your family. We have rights. I shook my head. Last time you told me to leave. This time, I'm the one asking you to go. Mom let out a bitter laugh and stormed past me. Dad followed, staring at the floor. Lila muttered, "You're going to regret this," and brushed past me. I closed the door and turned the lock. My hands shook, but beneath it was a steady calm. They had assumed that the phrase family asset would scare me into submission. They thought I was still the girl with her life in boxes on their lawn. But this time, I held the power. I called Eric Ramirez, my lawyer and longtime friend. I think my parents are trying something crazy with my house. Can we talk? Within an hour, he called back. I told him everything, the visit, the threats, the family asset line, and the underlying intimidation. Eric listened calmly. First, breathe. They aren't on your deed. They have no legal claim. But their threats and attempts to pressure you. That's sketchy. And considering they kicked you out before, not a good look for them. I exhaled slowly. So, they can't just move in. No. No judge will magically make your private property a shared family asset because they feel entitled, he said. But before we move, let's make sure they haven't been using your information for financial gain. Pull your credit reports, check for anything unusual. I felt my chest tighten. The thought of them using my identity again, after everything, made my stomach drop. But this time, I had allies, preparation, and control. That night, I sat at my desk in the home office, laptop open, ready to follow Eric's instructions. Pull up full credit reports from all 3 bureaus, not just the free ones, the real ones. My fingers trembled as I typed in my information, bracing for what I might find. And there it was. Accounts I had never opened, loans I had never authorized, store cards I had never touched. Some were small, others substantial. A personal loan taken out the year I got kicked out. Lines of credit opened in my name at banks I had never dealt with. My parents had been using my identity, quietly leveraging my financial credibility, while calling me a burden to my face. I called Eric immediately. "You were right," I said, my voice tight. "They've been using me. All these accounts, it's all them." He stayed calm, as he always did. "This is identity theft at minimum, fraud at worst. We'll need to act quickly, but we have the evidence we need to protect you." Over the next few weeks, my life became a strange mix of normal and surreal. By day, I went to work at the startup, coding, attending meetings, laughing with co-workers. By night, I sifted through documents with Eric on speakerphone, emails, bank statements, loan applications, letters from creditors. We filed disputes with every institution tied to accounts I did not authorize. Notarized letters, affidavits, detailed explanations of my situation. Some banks cooperated immediately. Others questioned me relentlessly, clearly unwilling to believe that my parents could act without my consent. Simultaneously, Eric filed for a restraining order. The threats they had made during their visit, texts like, "You will regret choosing a house over your family," were included. Evidence of emotional manipulation, combined with financial exploitation, painted a clear picture for the court. One night, Eric asked, "Are you sure you want to go through with this? Once we file, it's official. They'll know the law is involved." I thought about that girl standing on the lawn, clutching boxes of her life while her own mother told her to figure it out. I thought about the house I built, the life I had fought for. "Yes," I said firmly. "I am done hesitating. I am done being afraid." The court granted a temporary restraining order first, keeping my parents legally away from my home and workplace. The relief was immediate. My phone, which had been blowing up with calls and texts, finally quieted down. Months of hearings followed. My parents tried to argue that I was overreacting, that this was just a misunderstanding, that they had only tried to teach responsibility. But the evidence was overwhelming: credit reports, notarized statements, emails, texts, and the history of kicking me out on my birthday. Eventually, the judge granted a permanent restraining order. Any attempts to claim my house or involve themselves in my finances were legally blocked. My parents left the courtroom smaller than I had ever seen them. Their control, their intimidation, their entitlement, gone. Shortly after, the IRS and other agencies reviewed some of the suspicious accounts and unreported income. Their old house, the one they had pushed me out of for my sister, was seized and sold to cover debts and unpaid taxes. I didn't gloat. I just quietly felt the scales tilt back to fairness. I spent the next few days in my home, finally breathing without fear. Walking through the rooms, I realized something important. This space, these walls, were mine. Not a family asset, not a trophy for anyone else. Mine. I started rebuilding my life in every sense. Hosting friends without fear of judgment. Sharing my story online, not for pity, but to help others in similar situations. Teaching that boundaries, self-respect, and protecting yourself are not selfish acts. I still remember the small balcony, the kitchen with sunlight streaming in, and the quiet hum of the city outside. Every choice I had made, from the motel birthday to late-night coding sessions, led here. My parents had tried to define my life, control my decisions, and claim what I worked for. But in the end, all they did was give me the motivation to rise higher than I ever imagined. Winning didn't undo the pain. There was no apology, no reconciliation. But I was free. I had a safe space, financial independence, and a future that belonged only to me. I had finally stopped living in their story and started writing my own. And in that quiet, sunlit home, I realized, being thrown out on my birthday wasn't the end, it was the beginning of the life I was always meant to build.